Cześć kochani, witam Was bardzo serdecznie w naszym słuchowisku, gdzie, jak mam nadzieję, historie opowiedziane przez bohaterów audycji będą dla Was jakiegoś rodzaju inspiracją. Dziś, po wstępie, jako że mamy gościa z zagranicy, w audycji właściwej przeskoczymy na język angielski. Tak, żeby nie przedłużać, zapraszam Was do wstępu, a później do właściwej audycji. To jest punkt zwrotny. Gościem dzisiejszej audycji jest Tim Binnion.
And before we go to the topic, we'll do 1 minute meditation as always. So I want you all to close your eyes, focus on your breathing. Inhale slowly. Hold on with breath. And exhale. Inhale again. Hold the breath. And exhale. And now, think about color that will cleanse you today. It can be whatever color. And from the color you take, create an aura around you so it shines bright. Imagine this color surrounding you. And now, inhale this color and exhale. And so we can continue our talk and question Tim, what was the turning point, or what is the turning point in your life? Because there might be something.
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. Thank you for having me on your podcast. Very excited to have a very interesting chat today. Turning point. So I think when I was thinking about this before our chat, I was thinking there's probably two main key turning points I think I can look to in my life, and one that sort of is the turning point for the journey so far, and one relatively recent turning point, which I think is going to be for the future of the next stage of my journey. So I think for me, the first turning point for me was while I was studying at university and applying to go on internships. And there's sort of an international internship organisation called IASTI. It's quite big in Europe, placing students studying technical areas. I studied design engineering, and through this process ended up getting an internship in China, which was sort of not necessarily where I expected to end up when I applied for this internship. But through some of the connections through this program, ended up coming to China, to Changzhou, not too far away from where we are in Shanghai, with two of my good friends from university. And yeah, it was like this was like 2009 while I was studying. It's quite an eye-opening experience coming to China, because I think, like, for me, studying design, China still is where so much of the products we have in our lives are made. And so I think it was a very interesting experience in terms of, well, firstly from like that professional point of view, learning about China and how like factories, supply chains, all this sort of professional knowledge was. That was the first thing, but also on a sort of a personal level, I think it was the first time that I'd spent, quite a this like 6-month period away from home, away from my family. Certainly in Australia, it's less common to move cities for university as maybe it is in Europe. So that was sort of a real good experience to also not necessarily find myself, but sort of shape my a little bit with my experiences, and how that all turned out. So I think, I think for me, I'd always wanted to, spend some time outside Australia, seeing the world, traveling, but didn't necessarily expect it to be China. So then that was a really interesting experience, and I through that really enjoyed, especially visiting Shanghai. I had a city that had so much energy, felt like so much was going on. At that time, there was so much construction for the World Expo coming up, so it felt like, everything was moving fast and changing, really, really dynamic sort of city and place. And, there's people doing all this cool, interesting stuff. And also Shanghai seemed a lot more interesting than Changzhou. It was, like more than a few parties, evenings, really enjoying the vibe and being young and a student at that time. So that was sort of a really cool, enjoyable experience. And so I went back to Australia, finished studying, did a little bit more travel, and then I was working in Australia for a couple of years after graduating. And then there was an opportunity actually with the boss of that company I did the internship for. Him and another businessman had set up a small design studio in Nanjing, and they were looking for someone to help them sort of run that. And so I heard about this opportunity again through some connections from this IST program in Australia. And I thought, that sounds like an interesting adventure. Even though I learned some stuff during the internship, I always wanted to sort of expand a bit of that knowledge. I thought that this knowledge and whatever I learn is going to be useful for my future career wherever I end up in future. So I sort of thought, all right, I'm going to move to China, to this small design studio, and sort of see how that goes. And so then that was almost 10 years ago, which is a bit unexpected how things turn out. But it's been a really great experience being here in China. And again, as I sort of touched on, I always wanted to live somewhere internationally. I was sort of thought, when I was younger, I thought maybe somewhere like Europe, UK. So it's a bit unexpected how it turned out to be China in the end. And that's been a really kind of eye-opening experience. And I think, living in China, it teaches you to be quite adaptable, open to new things, new experiences, but also dealing with unexpected things that crop up. And I think, there's definitely one lesson I've learned from China. It's that, if there's one barrier that sort of pops up, there's always a different way of doing things. There's different ways of solving problems. And so I think, it's definitely taught me to be quite adaptable in sort of how I live my life. I met my girlfriend here. She's from Poland. That's probably a third turning point, really. But she's also working here in China at the moment. So I think, it's been a really, definitely one big turning point for my life up to this point. I think that sort of brings us on to the second turning point I would identify, which is also a bit connected to professionally, but also, I think who I feel like I am as a person, not just as a profession, was, I guess, as I, from my studies, there was always been this little bit of an undercurrent, I would say, of like sustainability, eco-friendly. And I remember, one of my university lecturers teaching this class, saying that, we should be, as designers, aware of the products we design, making that sort of reducing the environmental impact. And this was, probably more than 15 years ago now, when it's sort of not as established as it is now. And I I maybe didn't realize at the time that something from that probably stuck with me. And then, my final year of university developed it was a wind turbine, sort of new energy product. And so there was, through my career, for quite a number of years, it was sort of there a little bit in the background. Was also involved in an energy efficiency startup back in Australia. And then I would say 2019, so 5 years ago, I was sort of working here in Shanghai for an exhibition design company, and you go to so many of these exhibitions and events, and they'll build these structures for 3, 4, 5 days, and then after this exhibition, it all just gets junked, and you see there's so much waste here. And even though it wasn't a primary focus, this company I worked for did make constructions that were a bit more easy to set up, disassemble. They could reuse some of the components, and so on. And so while I was sort of working for this company, I was also thinking sustainability would be cool to try and, develop my own project or startup. And I was sort of searching around for ideas, and I would say sort of half an idea around sustainable fashion. I'm not much of a fashion person. But while I was sort of doing a bit of research for this startup, I stumbled across a research paper written by an organization called the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. And this foundation is probably the leading not-for-profit organization in the world that is trying to promote this concept of a circular economy. And now a circular economy is sort of, at the moment, our society is set up as a linear economy. So we take materials and resources, we make those into materials, make those materials into products. We use those products in our homes, our businesses, and then when we're finished with them, we waste them. So it's like one straight line. And so very basically, the circular economy aims to take those materials, those products, and loop them back into a cycle. So they're reused, recycled, and so on. Which I can talk about this topic for hours, but that's sort of the very basic introduction to it. So when I sort of discovered this concept of the circular economy, that was also, a real turning point for me, because I was like, okay, here's all these things I've been interested in over the years, a bit of sustainability, energy efficiency, maybe reusing products, whatever. Here's this really great and interesting framework that really sort of lays out all this stuff that I'm already interested in, and it sort of helped me sort of solidify my knowledge and my interest around that. So I was like, okay, I need to follow this path a little bit and do a bit more research. So then in 2020, I did this Ellen MacArthur Foundation had some online programs during the pandemic. Some small training programs. So I did one, which was really interesting, and then I did a second one in 2021, which was a little bit more in depth with them. And so that was the moment I was like, yeah, this is cool, but it's also really interesting. And I think for me as a designer, sustainability is definitely the future. It needs to be the present as well, but definitely these skills and knowledge is only going to get more and more in demand. So there's sort of the intersection of professional, what are my skills, what skills are going to equip me for the future. Also, from a personal level, I've always felt like wanting to try and make a positive impact for society, for humanity. I've sort of reflected a little bit on why that might be and haven't necessarily come up to a clean answer why I have that sort of drive within me. But just also, enjoying being in nature and wanting to, sort of try and preserve that a little bit. And just the concept of waste just seems so absurd that, we have so many things in our lives, and when we finish with them, we just junk them. It seems like it's such a waste of resources and materials and value. So I think, that was a real turning point for me. So then 2 years ago, I set up my own company here in Shanghai devoted to sustainability more broadly, but with the framework of this circular economy. So now I focus on sustainable design across a number of different sectors, sustainable consulting and strategy, and also sustainable education, which is of those three is probably the one that I'm finding the most success at the moment. So training programs for businesses, also sort of teaching classes for students, which I think, again, it's sort of, it's a very important part of sustainability is inspiring the next generation and also equipping them with the skills and knowledge to deal with these problems. So absolutely, I would say that sort of uncovering this concept of the circular economy has been another, I think, big turning point, and that's the turning point I think that sort of guided me for, I hope, what's coming next in my life. So yeah,
you hinted a lot of good things about sustainability, which will be major path of questions. And before this, I will ask you, because I got curious at the beginning, if not China, where you could find yourself today, and how could you see yourself? Because you do sustainability here in China, and we know China is well-developed country in terms of technology, but in terms of society, sustainability, they are still like far behind Europe. But in spite of this, what could you do, or where could you be if you do not choose living in China and you never met China on your path of life?
Oh, it's a very good question. I think like reflecting back then, coming from Australia, it's quite a Western society, even though it's quite multicultural these days. Still, the background, or the bedrock of where Australia's history comes from is from obviously the UK and European influences. So for me, I think I was always had this I guess influence on British culture, music, movies, TV shows. Also, quite interested in Europe, especially from a design and engineering point of view. Germany, Netherlands, these sort of countries where it sort of had a big influence on design and engineering. So I think back then I would have, if you were to ask me, if you were to tell me, okay, you're going to spend 10 years outside Australia, back then I would have probably picked Europe, maybe either UK or probably I would say Germany back then. But it was sort of, as much as anything, just the circumstances, because right in this time period when I was keen to go overseas, experience the world, was around 2008, when there was the big financial crisis. And so US, Europe, to a lesser extent Australia as well, had this financial issues, companies not really hiring so much, and so it's difficult as a student to try and to get these experiences. And funnily enough, the Australian economy generally did quite well during that period because we sell a lot of resources to China. And so, when you look back, China at that point had a huge investment in construction infrastructure to sort of ride out that financial crisis. And so that sort of helped Australia through that time period as well. So yeah, I probably would have expected to be sort of spending some of that time in Europe, I think. Yeah.
Basically, what you mentioned with China, this is something I also observed, even though the first time I've been to China in 2011, after 2008, and after Olympics in Beijing, that was the huge start for China to grow rapidly. And that is fascinating, because when you mentioned your company and you mentioned your experience with sustainability in China, also, as we know each other for a year, and also we know each other for activities like in Founders Breakfast, and also recently you had your speech during GreenX. How do you see, let's say, the closest future, 5 years in China with sustainability, with your current experience, with what you observe, and the experience you got, and that are also a turning point? How can you see it, see it, that you see it growing, and you are, let's say, a part of growth in China?
I think if there's one thing certainly that I've learned in my time in China, it's that things in China happen very, very slowly up until a turning point
Yeah.
where they suddenly start happening very, very quickly. And, whether that's when you're trying to apply for a job or trying to do paperwork or, all this sort of bureaucratic organizational things, it's sort of, things don't happen. You have to ask and ask and ask. And then it comes to a point where suddenly everything's done. And I think it's a similar thing with sustainability. So I think things have been quite slow for quite a while, and where China was very focusing on growth and expansion and building new cities, new infrastructure, and that was really the focus. And sustainability kind of took a bit of a back seat for that. And of course, also with other countries around the world, US, Europe, Australia, now we exported a lot of the production and manufacturing to China, which has its own positives and negatives, which is probably not enough time to go into. But one of the positives was that some of these dirty, polluting industries all moved to China and allowed Europe, US, Australia to sort of clean up a little bit. But that meant that China, on the flip side, had a lot of these now polluting, dirty industries, manufacturing.
We can experience with pollution in Shanghai.
Absolutely, yeah. And I'm not going to say the only reason, but a big part of that is because it was producing stuff for the rest of the world. And so also, as China is also at quite a turning point at the moment, sort of demographically and economically, where it's not so easy for China just, money, construction. I think they're also pivoting to a bit more like next level, cleaner, a bit more services rather than just pure building or having the economy built on manufacturing. So naturally with that comes a shift to some of the cleaner, more high-tech ways of doing business, powering the economy. And likewise for sustainability, I think it was 2021, it was announced there's two twin goals of 2030 carbon peaking, 2060 carbon neutral. And again, it sort of comes back to that point around when the central government in China decides to do something, it happens. It might not happen necessarily overnight, but now we've got these big targets in place. It does take some time for those targets to filter down from central government to provincial level governments to cities, down to local governments who, and all those various layers of government have their various implementations, things that they need to do. So that does also take some time, but I think, it is at a point where it will happen. And, you see some headlines that are talking about China is, 4 or 5 years ahead of its targets on renewable energy, for example. So, I think there's definitely a lot of positive changes that are happening, certainly from a government point of view, from a more that private business point of view. With the economy relatively flat, let's say at the moment, some businesses are still focusing on just surviving, which is again fair enough, because you need to have these businesses surviving to start thinking about sustainability. So there still is some challenges there with talking to businesses and trying to get them on board with sustainability, but I think it is starting to gain momentum, and I'm sure it's only going to pick up in future in the next few years. So for me, it's helping to say, here's what's working internationally. That said, not everything, as I'm sure not everything that works internationally works in China. So it's, we're taking the best of what works internationally with the local demands and needs and how things are done here, and trying to figure out what's the best way of implementing some of these more sustainable solutions, I think. So it's a challenge, but it's also very exciting. I think there's a lot of potential to be here at the moment. So it's never a dull moment, that's for sure.
Yet I will combine two breaks in one, because previously you mentioned you lived in many cities in China, like Nanjing, Guangzhou. Also, from time to time, you live in Hangzhou, and your major city is Shanghai. And the second break is that you produce a series of end of line on YouTube, where actually you show people, let's say locally, each line and what are attractions around.
Yeah.
And during this experience, during this period of time you've been recording and still record, what did you find first, the most like interesting, let's say, if we can name it shortly, in Shanghai? And what do you find yourself in Shanghai comparing also other cities, like maybe unique or outstanding?
Good question. Yeah, I think like, and this is something you sort of is not so aware of for people who may be visiting China the first time, is how different a lot of those cities are. Because yeah, like those cities you just mentioned, Changzhou, Nanjing, Hangzhou, they're all relatively close, all within 300 kilometers of Shanghai, but they all have their own flavor. Like Changzhou is relatively a bit newer. There's a lot of industry there. Then Nanjing has been the capital of China in the past, so have a lot of that history, but it's also quite a big and expanding city. Being I think Jiangsu province is one of the richest provinces, probably outside of Beijing and Shanghai, the city provinces. So of course there's a lot of money there, the expansion, and likewise Hangzhou is traditional capital. A lot of trading went on in Hangzhou. West Lake is a lot of lovely nature, very close to Hangzhou, the mountains, the tea fields, which are really amazing.
And
Longjing, absolutely. I think anyone who visits Hangzhou should visit Longjing tea area. Is one of the top teas in China. It's quite amazingly close to like central Hangzhou. You can get out of the city really easily. So they all definitely have their own flavor, which is quite amazing, especially with the train system. It's so easy to visit now. And I think that's sort of one element of me is I've always been a bit of a, like I would say, curious explorer, and part of that manifests in my professional life. I'm always curious to learn about how things are done, how they could be done, and then on that more that personal level, exploring. And then as you said, the vlog series was just around. It actually started from when I was living in Nanjing, because I would travel on the metro, and I remember there's one metro line in Nanjing that goes like way out quite far
so
north.
Pagoda.
Yeah, exactly. And that metro line actually opened when Nanjing hosted the Youth Olympics back in, I think it was 2014, because some of the like water sports events were on a lake, so they built this metro line out to this lake. But then when you look at the map, you're like, why is there a metro line that goes way out of the city up there? And so you're like, well, I'll just take the metro line and go and see what's at the end. And so then, when I moved to Shanghai, even though I visited Shanghai quite often and, knew the central area relatively well, when I moved here, I was like, well, okay, now you've got this metro system that's continually expanding. I'm just going to, go out and see what's at the end of the line. So, I think for me, it's just, even though like a lot of the places are just average suburbia, there's always something interesting to find in a lot of them. And probably the one two that spring to mind that are maybe the most interesting, even though there's a lot of individual small stories in different places, is probably in Songjiang district. There's I think it's the second last station, Zuibaiche Gardens.
Yeah,
which I think is one of I do most of my research for these places on Wikipedia, but I think is like, there's 3 ancient gardens in Shanghai, and one of them is Yuyuan Gardens in central Shanghai, which is very famous, and it's lovely, but because it's so central, there's always so many people there, so it's hard to get that nice serene sense. But this
actually,
garden,
I hinted to my audience in the vlog when to visit Yuyuan Gardens, so if they already watched my vlog, they already know how to do. But if not, you are welcome to see the last vlog when we record now. It's WD #96, and if you want to know when to visit Shanghai and when to visit Yuya Garden and other busy places like Nanjing Street, you can see in the vlog.
Yeah, so I think definitely that this Swaibai Gardens, because it's really lovely gardens, but because it's further from the center, it's so much quieter. So that was really lovely. And then likewise, Genru Temple, I think that was on line 11, because again, there's quite famous Jing'an Temple, which is also very central, and it's really interesting, but it's very busy, lots of tourists, and it's also very renovated. Even though it's been a temple there for hundreds and hundreds of years, it's so renovated that you don't get so much of this unique vibe. But Genru Temple is not that far out of the city center, and it's again quite quiet. It's in a good condition, but it feels genuinely old.
And also the location next to the river is awesome.
Exactly, yeah. And so that's really, I remember when I went there, it was quite hot, but it was really quiet. And I think some of the monks there must be feeding the pigeons, because there's all these pigeons there, and you're like, where am I? It's so quiet, so serene, all these pigeons just chilling out, eating the grains, all the prayer wheels. That was a really unexpected experience to find.
And for the people who don't know, Shanghai Genru is just next to the city center. It's close, like a few stations away from Jing'an Temple. And I can tell you about line 11. You made me interested to visit Nanshan, and I did it for many times, and that's awesome.
yeah, Nanshang, that was also another cool spot, because I think, when you look at the history of Shanghai, it was from the Chinese side, it was just a small village, and so you have all these small villages dotted around. It was only when obviously the European settlement came to Shanghai that certainly became this southern trading spot and big port, and turned into the huge city it was. And so Nanshang is one of those. It was at one point a small village on its own, but as Shanghai's expanded, it's now basically a suburb of Shanghai. And for the listeners, one of the top food that you must try in Shanghai is the xiaolongbao, this sort of soup dumpling, and that's one of the dishes of Shanghai, but that originated from this Nanshang village.
Yeah, true. So, and especially those who don't know, because in China there are many places that serve this type of dumpling soup, but the original one is true from Nanshan.
Yeah, so and it just goes to show that even in a city such as Shanghai, there's so many of these small, interesting pockets around of still these small pockets of history amongst the big modernity and new city of Shanghai.
If you want to see how actually Shanghai looks like besides the vlogs I provide, you can also visit Tim's channel, which will be linked in the description. And what is nice, you can also distinguish Shanghai by the stations, which is also unique for your series.
Yeah, I need to get back to filming. It's
basically, by far, as I remember, you have 12 lines completed, including Maglev and Pujan line.
Yes, yeah. So line 13, I think I've had a little bit more time recently, but the weather's been too hot. I think probably early October I need to get out filming and back to editing, because it's they're building lines quick. I started this project when I moved to Shanghai in 2017, or a bit after that, and so it's sort of been a longer term project than I expected, but I'm very keen to get back to it. So,
and here will be a surprise question, like, what if you do not live in China, and what if all this doesn't happen? What could you do?
Oh, good question. I don't know. Like, for me, I think there's of course so many great things about Australia, and the longer term plan is to move back to Australia with my girlfriend. But I still feel like the things we do in Australia are great, but there's still a little bit of a lacking in some of this more maybe entrepreneurial creativity. I mean, of course, there are smaller pockets of design, innovation companies, but it's maybe not on the scale that we have, certainly here in China and also Europe. So I think I'm certainly glad to have experienced being in China, having that opportunity to experience it and be a part of it, the hustle and bustle and busyness.
True.
So, but if I didn't come to China, I think, yeah, like I said, I think I probably would have tried to go. I think probably Europe, maybe UK. Is maybe, as an Australian, is some connect like pathways to spend time there. I'm not sure that I would have spent as long overseas as I have. So when I left, I didn't expect to be here this long, but it's certainly been a great adventure. And yeah, I don't know. It's hard to say where I would have been if I hadn't had the experience. But back before I came to China, I was interested in maybe being like a pure designer of just trying to design of really nice products. But I think like also, I mean, design is still quite competitive, and I feel that some elements of my skills don't compete with like pure designers so much. So I think, as I kind of alluded to at the start, I studied design engineering, sort of like a combination of engineering and design. And so I think it's not always easy to compete with the pure designers in certain skills, but also having that engineering side brings a different set of skills to the table that I can offer. So whether how I would have gone in that alternative universe of trying to find my way in Europe, I'm not sure. But I think, and also reflecting, getting back to some of those turning points, I think like I remember since not long after I left university, I always had this idea in the back of my mind that I wanted to start my own studio, my own business, do my own thing. But I didn't really have a clear plan of how to get there, or sort of idea of what I would do, because I think it's important for new businesses to have that niche to operate in. What's the thing that sets you apart? And so again, it was sort of only when I further discovered this circular economy sustainability field, I'm like, okay, yeah, that's how I can set myself apart from this other competitive field. And especially even in Shanghai, there's so many good foreign designers, but now, especially the last few years, the level of Chinese design is as good or better in many ways than foreign designers. So again, that makes it difficult. So how are you going to compete with all these amazing designers? That's by setting myself apart with offering this sort of combination of sustainability and design. So I think I'm not sure I'm not sure what niche I would have ended up in that alternative path. But again, I feel that sort of coming across sustainability has really helped give me a bit more a sense of purpose and also clarity on how I can build my own studio, my own business. So it's still a work in progress building that, but I think a lot more confident in the path I'm on after this sort of turning point in professionally and also personally, because I think it's certainly in the past I've maybe wrapped up who I think I am as a person a bit much with that professional side of things. So when you're struggling to find a new job or advance to the next level, it affects you negatively as a person and your self-esteem. So I think it's also something I've been trying to do is separate a bit more who I am as a person with who I am professionally, and not. I think I have that sense of purpose of this drive of wanting to do something good for society, which sort of connects the two a bit much, which not necessarily everyone has, which is fine. So also just trying to separate that a little bit, and who I am as a friend, as contributing to communities like Founders Breakfast, who I am as a boyfriend, all those sort of things.
Yeah.
Trying to separate that a bit more with who I am professionally, I think has been also a good learning and something I think has been probably beneficial to, when you miss out on that project or something and it doesn't work out, trying not to take that personally has been, I think, a good thing to try and separate that a bit more as well. So
And now, last question, like focusing on now, what could be piece or pieces of advice would you say to yourself from, let's say, 20 years ago? And what are your wishes for, let's say, next 10 years?
Ooh, good question. I think maybe one piece of advice is I always, just thinking back to university, even though I wasn't that much of a serious person, like, making jokes sometimes, I think I maybe took the idea of being a designer too seriously. I was sort of a bit focused on that. And again, that comes a little bit to what we were just talking about, is it may be I connected that too much with my personality back then. So I think, probably the advice is, even though I generally don't take life too seriously, is maybe just, ease off a little bit on that idea of like wrapping myself up too much in that professional side of things. And also, it's something I've learned over the years is, just be a bit more, there's like the saying is, be like water. When there's a problem that presents itself and it's blocking the path that you thought was the way, there's always a way around it. There's a different way of things. So, again, when I thought that I wanted to, go to Europe and stuff, and applying through this program that I mentioned, there was positions that I didn't get in Europe, and so I was a bit down on that, because that was what I wanted, that was what I thought I was going to do, and yet things have worked out fine with how they worked out. There's always a different way of doing things that you might not see yet. So try and just it's okay to want more and want better. Want the next step in your life. That's fine, but just to try and relax a little bit and know that it will work out in the end, maybe just a little bit differently to how you imagined it would work out. That's probably the number one advice I would give myself. Maybe I would probably also tell my younger self to invest in Bitcoin or something. But in terms of where I'd like to be in 10 years, if I'm running my company and managing to make some positive impact in terms of creating some products or businesses that do less harm for the environment and good for humanity, then I'd probably be satisfied. Ideally, a nice house in the countryside somewhere, probably Australia, a little bit, not too far from the city, because I still like that hustle and bustle, but also somewhere that allows you to sort of, take time out and relax a bit. I'd probably be happy with that, I think. So, but yeah, I think there's so many pieces of advice I've learned along the way, and I think any challenges. So starting out a business on your own is also not easy. It's hard sometimes to just get up every day and like, okay, what do I need to do next? Or I think always when you have one or two people you're working on a business with, it's just helps so much for motivation, but also a little bit of accountability. It's as a solo founder, he's like, I'll sleep another half an hour, So there's always that side of things. There's so many lessons I've learned along the way that I we'd spend another half an hour talking about, but probably, I would say just relax. It'll work out in its own way. Just accept that it's not necessarily what you thought it's going to be, but it'll be great just in a different way. That's probably the number one thing, I think.
Thank you for today's conversation, and thank you for today's meeting.
Thank you.
For the audience, if you would like to get know more Tim, visit his channel, and also if you would like to follow his social media, you can see his Instagram beneath, and also you can read more about his company and his design idea in description.
Yeah, probably most active on Instagram, and I hope to be very soon active a bit more again on YouTube. So but thank you.
Tak więc, kochani, dziękuję Wam za wysłuchanie dzisiejszej audycji. Mam nadzieję, że historia Tima była dla Was inspirująca. Oczywiście czekam na Wasze komentarze. A tymczasem słyszymy się w następnym odcinku audycji Punkt Zwrotny. Trzymajcie się. Pozytywnych wibracji. Cześć.